Let's talk about something huge happening in the world of AI right now. There's this massive, and I mean massive, paradox. Companies are pouring billions of dollars into AI, but almost nobody is actually seeing a return on that investment. So today, we're going to dive into this mystery. We'll unpack why so many projects are failing, and more importantly, what that tiny group of successful companies is doing completely differently. Okay, let's start with a number that is just, honestly, it's staggering. Based on some pretty deep research from MIT, a full 95% of all corporate AI projects, they deliver absolutely zero measurable impact. Nothing. That's not a typo. 95%. Just let that sink in for a second. And we're not talking about small side projects here. The scale of this waste is kind of mind-boggling. We're looking at somewhere between $30 and $40 billion being poured into these AI initiatives. All that money, all that effort, with almost nothing to show for it on the bottom line. It's a huge gamble where almost everyone is losing. So you have to ask, what is going on here? How is this even possible? Well, this quote from that same MIT research, it just absolutely nails the core problem. Most companies are coming at AI completely backwards. They're starting with the cool, shiny new tech, the LLM, and then they're running around trying to find a problem for it to solve. And that, right there, is a recipe for disaster. And that really brings us to the $40 billion question, right? Why is this failing on such an epic scale? So in this next part, we're going to break down the real systemic reasons behind this unbelievable 95% failure rate. Let's get into it. So the research points to 5 critical gaps that just keep tripping companies up. And these aren't just little mistakes. They're like fundamental flaws in how most people are approaching this. It all starts with a huge data crisis. Then there's a total lack of business integration, so pilots just go nowhere. There's no way to even measure success. It's all driven by that backward tech-first mindset we talked about. And finally, the timelines for getting any return are just completely out of whack. Let's dig into that first barrier, because it's the biggest one, the data quality crisis. You can think of it as the 80-20 problem. You see, only about 20% of a company's truly important information is sitting nicely in structured databases where AI can easily find and use it. The other 80%, all the real context, the knowledge buried in emails and documents and call transcripts, is completely ignored. The AI is basically flying blind. It can't see most of what's actually happening in the business. And that leads us to the next gap, which creates this thing you could call pilot purgatory. This is where good ideas go to die. An unbelievable 88% of AI pilot projects never ever make it into production. They seem really cool in a controlled lab setting, but they completely fail to connect to how people actually work, to the real-world business processes. And so they just wither away. You know, those other gaps really all flow from that same root cause, the tech-first approach. When you don't start with a business goal, you have no way to measure if the AI is actually doing anything useful. In fact, IBM found this often leads to a negative return on investment. And even for the rare few that do eventually pay off, the timeline gets stretched out to a painful 2 to 4 years, which is just way longer than a typical tech investment. Okay, so that's the problem, and yeah, it's a big, messy problem. But here's the good news. There is a different way. So now let's pivot to the solution. Let's look at how that top 5% is actually getting this right. And spoiler alert, they're using a structured methodology called the IPE framework. And this right here, this slide really sums up the whole difference. It's a fundamental shift in thinking. You've got the failing 95% on one side, they start with the tech and then go looking for a problem. The successful 5%, they do the complete opposite. They start with a very specific business outcome they need to achieve, and then, only then, do they bring in the right technology to make it happen. So what is this IPE thing? Well, integrated process excellence, and the most important thing to get about it is that it is not another piece of technology. It's a business framework. Think of it like a repeatable recipe, a system that takes all the guesswork and random experimentation out of AI and turns it into a predictable discipline that's laser-focused on results. All right, so let's connect this all back to those 5 big gaps we talked about, the 5 reasons for failure. We're going to walk through one by one and see exactly how this IPE framework systematically closes each and every one of those gaps that causes 95% of projects to just fail. Let's start with the big one, the problem that something like 73% of data leaders say is their absolute #1 barrier to success. How in the world do you actually fix the data quality crisis so your AI isn't just making things up? Well, IPE solves this by starting with the business process itself. First, you actually map out how work gets done to see where data is being created. Then, you set up quality standards right there at the source. And here's the really crucial part. You link that messy 80% of unstructured knowledge, the emails, the notes, to the clean 20% of structured data. This creates something called entity resolution, which is just a fancy way of saying the AI gets one single, unified, accurate view of a customer, not a dozen different broken pieces. Okay, on to the next one. How do you escape pilot purgatory? How do you make absolutely sure that your cool new AI tool actually gets used in the real world and doesn't just die on a shelf somewhere? The answer is pretty simple. IPE provides that systematic framework that most projects are completely missing. It makes sure the AI is specialized for your specific business needs, not just generic internet stuff. It forces you to set up clear metrics before you even start, so you actually know what success looks like. And it uses that process map we just talked about to weave the AI solution directly into how your team already works. So what happens when you actually make this shift? When you stop treating AI like a random science experiment and start treating it like a serious business discipline? Let's look at the payoff, the real, tangible results this whole approach generates. I mean, the research on this is just crystal clear. Companies that get their data and their process infrastructure right, which is the exact foundation that IPLV builds, they see wildly better financial results. We're talking about 5 times the revenue growth and an absolutely staggering 89% higher profits. This is the direct payoff for building on a solid foundation. This table here really just lays out the entire transformation. It's a night and day difference. Before IPE, you've got a tech experiment. You're looking at a 2 to 4 year timeline. You have no idea what your data is telling you, and the financial outcome is probably going to be 0 or even negative. But after IPE, it's a true business discipline. The ROI timeline shrinks to a normal 7 to 12 months. You can actually trust your data, and the financial outcome becomes both predictable and high. So when we say high and predictable ROI, what does it actually mean in terms of numbers? Well, when AI is done this way, as a systematic discipline, it can consistently deliver returns in the range of 500 to 1,000%. I mean, this is the kind of game-changing impact everyone was hoping for from AI, but it's what only that top 5% is actually getting. So, really, this leaves us with one final crucial question. As you look at the AI initiatives happening around you in your own company, you have to ask yourself, is it just a hopeful technology experiment that's probably destined to join the 95%? Or is it being driven like a systematic business discipline, setting it up for those predictable, massive returns? Because the answer to that question makes all the difference in the world.